The White House on Friday called for significant cuts to non-defense programs as part of President Trump's fiscal 2026 budget request, while proposing to beef up funding for defense and the president's broader priorities. The so-called skinny budget is not as detailed as usual presidential budget requests, which is not uncommon for a president's first-year proposal. However, some budget hawks are already grumbling about what they say are key missing details. Republicans have said they expect more information about the president's preferred spending direction in the coming weeks. The request is a wish list from the president, rather than a bill that would be enacted. But the latest request from the White House provides a critical look into the president's funding priorities for the coming fiscal year, as Republicans look to significantly reduce federal spending. Here's 5 things to know about the budget request. Dozens of programs on the chopping block. Trump proposed eliminating or zeroing out funding for dozens of federal programs the administration says are either duplicative, underperforming, or out of line with the administration's priorities. The wide-ranging list of programs includes the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, the Sexual Risk Avoidance Education Program, Job Corps, the Community Development Block Grant Program, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the 400 Years of African American History Commission, and the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program, which the administration said is similar to the mandatory Personal Responsibility Education Program. The U.S. Agency for Global Media, the U.S. Institute for Peace, and the National Endowment for Democracy would also see the chopping block. As development agencies find themselves in the administration's crosshairs, the budget proposes a nearly $27 billion reduction for the Department of Housing and Urban Development HUD, with state rental assistance block grants on the chopping block. It instead calls for the transformation of the rental assistance programs into a state-based formula grant, which would allow states to design their own rental assistance programs based on their unique needs and preferences. The budget would also newly institute a 2-year cap on rental assistance for able-bodied adults and would ensure a majority of rental assistance funding through states would go to the elderly and disabled. The request said a state-based formula program would also lead to significant terminations of federal regulations, a widening gap between defense and non-defense. The budget request unveiled Friday included a cut to non-defense discretionary spending amounting to $163 billion, or about 23%. Defense funding, meanwhile, would rise by about 13%, the White House said. That builds on the funding bill the government is currently operating under, which kept funding for 2025 roughly level with 2024, while increasing defense spending by $6 billion and cutting non-defense spending by $13 billion. A breakdown in the Friday request outlines the proposed cuts by agency, with the administration calling for cuts of about 18% for the Department of Agriculture, 17% for the Commerce Department, 15% for the Education Department, 9% for the Energy Department, 44% for the HUD, 31% for the Interior Department, 8% for the Justice Department, 35% for the Department of Labor, 84% for the Department of State and International Programs, and 19% for the Treasury Department. At the same time, increases are proposed for several agencies, including a roughly 13% boost for the Department of Defense, a nearly 65% boost for the Department of Homeland Security, a roughly 6% jump for the Transportation Department, and an increase of about 4% for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Defense hawks are still unhappy. Administration officials touted the request at putting defense spending above $1 trillion, but the budget assumes some of the increases for defense and the administration's border plans would be provided through Trump's big, beautiful bill that Republicans are working to assemble in Congress, and that is crafted separately from the appropriations process. Republicans are using a process known as budget reconciliation to advance the president's tax agenda, while also making further cuts to spending and boosting funding for defense and the president's deportation plans. While the process can be time-consuming and restrictive, it would ultimately allow Republicans to jam through such a package without having to worry about likely Democratic opposition in the Senate. But some Republicans have come out against the gambit of counting funds from the reconciliation bill toward fiscal 2026 defense spending. President Trump successfully campaigned on a peace through strength agenda, but his advisors at the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, were apparently not listening. Senate Armed Services Chair Roger Wicker said in a statement Friday for the defense budget. OMB has requested a fifth year straight of Biden administration funding, leaving military spending flat, which is a cut in real terms. Wicker added that he has said for months that reconciliation defense spending does not replace the need for real growth in the military's base budget. Head Start not mentioned amid education cuts, while the proposed budget has called for cuts to the Department of Health and Human Services HHS. OMB Director Russell Vought said Friday that the reductions do not include changes to Head Start programs, which provide early childhood education to low-income families. His comments come as the Trump administration is already facing legal challenges after previous reports that Head Start funding was set to be cut in the HS budget amid office closures. However, the request does also outline notable reductions on the education side, including proposals to eliminate preschool development grants and cuts funding for the Education Department's Office for Civil Rights, more than $1.5 billion in spending reductions under a line item for TRIO programs, and gaining early awareness and readiness for undergraduate programs. Gear Up are also proposed for the Education Department. TRIO and Gear Up are a relic of the past when financial incentives were needed to motivate institutions of higher education IHEs to engage with low-income students and increase access. The request stated the lack of action by IHEs also meant that states and local school districts needed additional support to prepare low-income students for college. Tax cuts TBD, while proposing a cut of more than $2.4 billion to the IRS in a move it said would end weaponization of IRS enforcement. The budget request also states that the elimination of certain complex tax credits and technology improvements would increase IRS efficiency. Pressed about the proposal on Friday, White House officials said all of the administration's proposals would be included in the more detailed budget plan expected later in the year.